Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we'll be covering the latest updates around the Bitcoin market. We'll also be talking about price predictions of Bitcoin using technical analysis. Most of you are wondering, is now a time to continue to dollar cost averaging? Should I be buying, selling, or holding Bitcoin? We'll cover all of that. Also, we'll be covering technical analysis of strategy MSTR Titan of the Bitcoin Treasury Company, as well as covering technical analysis of the big three Bitcoin miners. We're seeing a lot of traction with the miners as well. And how high can these miners really go? Now, if you're new to this channel, first off, I would really appreciate hitting the like and subscribing for more related content. And watch until the end, where I'll be playing an epic video clip of CEO Bitwise with his price prediction of Bitcoin, as well as Saylor's prediction with Bitcoin. Let's get started, guys.
Oh, we're around 3 trillion in assets in the digital asset space. That is minuscule compared to the broader global wealth of assets, right? So my point is Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the whole space is quite small relative to where traditional assets are. So if one were to think this is going to continue, then over time that should continue to grow, right?
So there you heard it from Fidelity, 5 trillion to 900 trillion. It's really early. We're still in that generational wealth. There's going to be a big transition. Retail hasn't even FOMOed in yet. So definitely some huge upside with Bitcoin. Watcher Guru posts that just in 60% of Fortune 500 companies are working on blockchain projects, Coinbase reports. What does this mean? I mean, Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency market is here to stay. And one of the things I think about is with Bitcoin and its creation, it's been around for, less than 2 decades, about, less than 15 years. But when you think about Bitcoin and crypto, it's going to go in complementary with like AI projects. So, by not embracing Bitcoin or crypto, that's where you're just going to be left behind, along with how we look at, AI. Watcher Guru also posts today that the United States and China, they agree on a principle for a framework for a new trade deal after 2 days of talks in London. Any positive news with China, United States will definitely send the markets up. The market will react to this. The market loves certainty, and this will really drive up the price of Bitcoin as well as the stock market. We know that the S&P 500 is heavily correlated with Bitcoin and how it performs. So definitely we're getting more and more, certainty around United States and China, along with extension with tariff. Fiat Archive posts that Bernstein says their 200,000 Bitcoin forecast is too conservative. What does that mean? How high can Bitcoin really go? Tom Lee, he forecasted 150,000 to 250,000. Arthur Hayes forecasted, that in the Trump 2.0 era, we will see Bitcoin get to $1 million. So are we on a conservative number, just forecasting that Bitcoin to reach $200,000 in this cycle? Fiat Archive also posts Michael Saylor says the bear market is not coming back. Bitcoin is not going to zero. It's going to $1 million. And I'd love to hear what your perspective is. Put it in the comments what your price prediction in this year 2025 is going to be for the price of Bitcoin. PlanB posts today, would be nice if the relative strength of Bitcoin hits 75, which would be represented in an orange dot. Again, this month, RSI 75 equals 130,000 Bitcoin June closing price. So, can Bitcoin get a relative strength of like 75? I think if we get any relative strength of like 75 and beyond, you will see Coinbase application being like, on the top 10 list for most downloads. And this is where retail is going to get in and try to, get into the crypto space as well. HODL 15 posts list of significant Bitcoin announcements. So we hear a lot of different levers being pulled by Strategy, with Stride being created, and now that's to raise 1 billion capital to buy Bitcoin. And Strategy has 52 billion in dry powder remaining for Strategy. Meta Planet, they're targeting 210,000 Bitcoin by 2027. Trump announces, its plan to buy, $2.5 billion worth of, Bitcoin as well. GameStop has already, purchased Bitcoin with less than 5,000 Bitcoin. Nakamoto is also buying Bitcoin. Even a K-pop company called K-Wave is planning to buy Bitcoin. We hear Semler Scientific continuing to buy Bitcoin, as well as 21 Capitals, attempting to raise billions of dollars to buy Bitcoin. And right now, 21 Capital is like top number three company around the world. In fact, their stack right now is 42,000 Bitcoin, but they won't stop. They're just going to continue to buy Bitcoin. So obviously, what does this mean? There's a global race. Public companies are buying. We haven't even heard of the influx of the government getting involved. And by that time, retail will be too late. I mean, we're currently at 95% Bitcoin mined. In the next 10 years, by 2035, we'll get to 99% of Bitcoin mined. So there won't be too much Bitcoin left. And what does that mean? Price of Bitcoin is going to be very high. One thing to think about, which Tom Lee did state, which really resonates with me, is that 95% of Bitcoin has already been mined, but 95% of the population hasn't even got into Bitcoin yet. So just put that into context. Once that 95% of the population, conforms and embraces Bitcoin, what does that mean? Everyone's going to want a piece of it. By then, it's going to be so difficult to even own a portion of Bitcoin. Let's take a look at the technicals of Bitcoin. We're looking at Bitcoin on the weekly candles. Key thing that I want to point out is when we have that 9 to 21 moving average on the weekly, at that time, price action was hovering at around 63,000. And what happened after that? We reached the all-time high, towards the end of 2024 to like 110,000. Obviously, we had that crossing, that death crossing on the weekly. What happened then? We saw it retrace down. We saw a lot of outflows from the ETFs. People were, selling off Bitcoin. But what happened since? We've seen that reversal. It got down to 75,000 and Bitcoin reversed back and just, climbed that stair up, to reach its prior resistance. And in fact, recently getting to all-time high of 112,000. Here's a key thing I want to point out though. We got that golden cross on the 9 to 21 weekly candle. And what this represents is, what we saw when that had happened was around 63,000 all the way up to like 110,000. So about an 80-90% gain. So is this a direction towards getting another 80, percent gain from the price of like 108,000? It's very possible. And I think that, Bitcoin is here to stay with the macro updates. Everyone wants Bitcoin. It's a global race right now with global game theory. You know, on the exchanges, Bitcoin is getting more and more scarce. And for those reasons, I do see that upside to 200,000 in this cycle. And just looking at the MACD, we're seeing the reversal on the MACD on the weekly. I do foresee we're going to have this, this green hill that's going to be established, similar to what we saw from October to February. So definitely some huge upside as we're seeing the golden crossing as well as MACD, being created. Let's take a look at the technicals of strategy. So today, not much action with strategy. However, key thing is this is looking very prime for a huge breakout. I do think that strategy is just awaiting for a big time run up. relative strength is consistently in that 60 RSI. It hasn't been overbought yet, but once we saw that, back in November, this thing shot up to like 550. Relative strength is steadily increasing. We're also seeing the MACD also show signs of a bullish divergence, but it's only a matter of time. We see this, cup and handle formation forming, and we're breaking out of this bullish pennant flag, and it's only a matter of time. I think that it may very well be this week where we get to 440 before we retest that prior resistance of 550. I'm banking on strategy this year, 2025. On the low scale, we're going to break through that $1,000 range. Let's take a look at Mara, the biggest Bitcoin miner. Mara mined 950 Bitcoins in the month of May. They continue to ramp up their hash rate. Not much people are talking about Mara. Short interest, is like, around that 25, 27%. We may very well get a big short squeeze. We've seen what had happened in the last bull cycle. What I like about Mar is that, we're seeing an inverse head and shoulder. We broke out of that bull flag for many months, and we're testing that prior resistance, close to that $17. Current price at 16.49. I think that, it may very well be, tomorrow or, Thursday where we break out of that level one prior resistance. And then I do think that it may be this week or next week we test that $20, and we're going to get back to that prior resistance of $30 sometime this month or July. But there's so much potential of a short squeeze. I wouldn't be surprised if Mara reaches $80 this year. Let's take a look at Riot platform. So there's definitely some huge upside with Riot. Volume's been picking up. The relative strength has been steadily increasing. The MACD has flipped the switch after that huge bearish convergence. We're also seeing inverse head and shoulders. We're seeing this bullish engulfing pattern, a solid week last week with that vertical green candle, and we're starting the latest week, on the green side, but we may very well continue to see Riot climb up. We passed that level one of 1020. Now the next level prior resistance is 1250, which we've seen it hover for many months in the early phases of 2024 through February of this year. Before we get to $12, as we climb to that level, we may very well flip the switch. That prior resistance becomes a support before we get to that prior resistance of $15. There's a lot of talks about Riot platforms. Calio, a big time investor, he's creating big options. He's very bullish with Riot platforms. He's forecasting that Riot can very well have a GME potential like performance with over 10x potential. So anything's possible. We saw that happen in the last bull cycle, similar to Mara and CleanSpark. So definitely watch out for Riot platforms, because when this puppy runs, it runs. CleanSpark, let's take a look at CLSK. Similar deal, inverse head and shoulders. I've been talking about this. I do see that CleanSpark has, solid, price action as well. Relative strength has been steadily increasing. MACD, we're also seeing the reversal pattern, bullish activity kicking in. The inverse head and shoulders also established. We're breaking out of this bull flag. Similar deal. CleanSpark, I definitely see it, climbing. It's going to break through this 1081 this week, I'm thinking. It's very possible before we reach that level two of $15. We've seen $15, from February 2024 to July 2024, over half a year in that price range. And we even got there back in November. So I definitely do see the upside getting back to that prior resistance before we retest that, $25 trajectory. However, I do believe CleanSpark has potential to break out into that $40 zone in the year 2025. With all of that, let's hear CEO of Bitwise, and then we'll hear a clip of Michael Saylor.
Yeah, we still are holding by that prediction. I think that's how the market is setting up. When we look at the market, Talia, we see a structural imbalance between the demand for Bitcoin and the available supply. We know the Bitcoin network only produces 165,000 Bitcoin per year. That's the full supply. And we see demand from ETFs, which are pulling in hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin per year. Corporations, as we discussed, also purchasing hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin, and governments purchasing, in our view, hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin. As the structural demand supply imbalance plays out in the market, it's exhausting the available supply. We think we're close to breaking out to new all-time highs. And when we do, we think, the market could run all the way up to 200,000. It would help if the U.S. government announced net new purchases of Bitcoin for its U.S. strategic reserve. It will help if we get passage of the Genius Act and maybe market structure regulation in the U.S. But even if those things don't happen, we think the demand from institutional investors and corporations and governments around the world are enough to lift this market much higher. It is just a fantastic setup for Bitcoin right now, with worries about the dollar, growing institutional demand. I think it's going to be a fantastic second half of the year.
You're doing a lot more than just holding the Bitcoin, so it's, I think, unfair to compare you to an ETF, but it sounds like you may be inviting competition from a JP Morgan, for example, which then makes me wonder, when does this asset start to convince the naysayers? Jamie Dimon has famously said it's worthless. Warren Buffett has called it probably rat poison squared. When does it win those people over?
People called electricity worthless and aircraft worthless too when they didn't understand them. So I welcome the competition from JP Morgan. I hope they enter the space. Our advantage is that we're 100% Bitcoin. So whenever we create a preferred stock, it has the Bitcoin performance, and it has a measure of Bitcoin performance and a fraction of Bitcoin volatility. That allows us to issue the most liquid preferred stocks in the world at the highest performance. Strike was up 29% when the rest of the market of preferreds was down 6%. Strife was up 22% when the rest of the market was down 4.6%. It's impossible to issue Bitcoin-backed convertible preferreds and Bitcoin-backed fixed preferreds unless you're willing to make 100% of your balance sheet Bitcoin. So I'm not really worried about competition from JP Morgan or Berkshire Hathaway. I would love for them to enter the Bitcoin space, buy up a bunch of Bitcoin. When they do it, they'll be paying $1 million of Bitcoin. The price will go to the moon. That will be good for the entire crypto economy and beneficial to everyone that holds any BTC-backed equity or credit-based instrument.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed another episode at All I See Is W. Let me know what your thoughts are, what your price prediction of Bitcoin is, where you're watching from. Thanks, guys. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.